All right, we're back again. And Brian, you're going to become a regular fixture on this video series. Brian Bartel, Suzi Collins. And last time we talked a little bit about inventory turns. And then you both mentioned that your inventories were coming up, or Brian, I think you might have even been in the middle of yours. And now here we are, we're going to come back. And today we're going to be talking about obsolete inventory, how to identify it, what to do with it. And just want to welcome you both back. And Suzi, let's start with you because you're like right in the middle of inventory right now. You just finished at one site, on to the next, and seems like a perpetual process.
It is. So we finished at one of our hospitals locally last week. We'll be starting literally as soon as I get off this video shoot. But I think it's funny because we're using some technology which is making it far better, and I'm a lot less stressed. They can go look at my LinkedIn. But I found some suture, right, that we had scanned, and it was expiring in November. So I went to the clinical coordinator in the OR, and I said, hey, you don't have any purchase history on this, which means it moved from when we closed one of the other hospitals. We have never actually purchased this. So what do we say? We take it off the shelf. You would have thought I was asking for her firstborn child. She was in pain. And it was a good 10 minutes to get her to finally acquiesce and say, okay, we don't need to reorder it. I'm just like, if you've never bought it and it's expired, why do you want it? But it's that whole just in case mentality, and it's challenging.
Well, you inherit the surgeons too, right? And so is there something you think going on in the back of their mind where they're thinking, well, I didn't buy this before, but now that I've inherited the surgeon with this product, I certainly don't want to not have it if the surgeon all of a sudden asks me for it. So, I think there's a big confidence building piece, right? You have the data, you're definitely trying to streamline things, and obsolete doesn't necessarily mean expired, right? Obviously, expired product is obsolete, but you're saying like it's just not even relevant to have it on our master. Like, how do we even call this down and really evaluate what we're using in our facilities? How do you approach that? Do you show them the data? What is I know you're telling them that, but how do you kind of prove it? Or maybe you ask them to investigate themselves and talk to the team leads that might be using the product to just verify, no, we aren't using that.
Yeah, and we went, there were other products. So because I did the inventory last year and I kind of have a weird brain that remembers things, I kind of mentioned to her, I'm like, there's product on the shelf that I remember counting last year and it's still here without movement. And I said, those are the kind of things that we need to think about, because if we're going to, if our data team is going to look at stuff, right, and they see I counted 10 last year and I've counted 10 this year and I have no purchase history, they're going to say, you're not managing your inventory well, because that means that has 0 turns, right? So that impacts how everything else looks. So you really just have to have those conversations and be ready to have a rebuttal against the either just in case or, well, we have a new surgeon coming in. And that's what she brought up. We do have a new ortho surgeon. And I said, so can we ask her if she's going to use it? Because if she isn't, we need to move it. Like, it needs to go somewhere where it's going to be used.
Brian, you just went through inventory. Did you find several cases of obsolete inventory? Did you find yourself having similar conversations, or maybe not this go around, but in the past? And how did you handle it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always a challenge. And exactly what Suzi's saying is something that I think every healthcare facility deals with. At our facility, it's policy when we count, we're supposed to use little dots in like hard to reach areas and things like that. And so I've been at my current role for 3 years, and I've found products that have literally like 10 dots. A lot of this stuff doesn't expire, but that's another thing too. It's like, all right, just because it doesn't expire doesn't mean that it's not obsolete. And so 100%, I mean, it becomes difficult. And again, we go back to like what we talked about the first time, and there's certain things that as supply chain, we'll just decide to get rid of. If it's forms, something that we just know has no clinical value, But some of these other things, what we did this past inventory is we actually ran usage reports, and we sent that out as kind of a pre-inventory checklist. And we had each department review everything that had no usage in the last 12 months, and said, tell us if this is something that you absolutely need or if this is something that we can delete. Again, remember from the clinical side, the last thing that they ever want, and as a supply chain that we ever want, is to not have a product. And so there's a lot of fear behind relieving an item because they might think, well, we're not 100% sure what this is. We talked about the trouble with descriptions, Suzi. You send them a list with, hard to decipher descriptions, and they're going to be like, yeah, I think I want to keep that, just because they're busy. They don't want to go look through everything. But again, it is definitely a challenge. But that's one thing that we did. And then again, just making that decision. Sometimes it is something that you need to have an input. But again, if it's expiring time after time, and it's not a critical item, then those are things that we'll just get rid of too.
I really like how you frame the mindset by sending some of that data out ahead of time and just ask them to start thinking about it. You didn't say make a decision right now. You didn't necessarily put like a complex task in front of them. You just started to shape how they were viewing the inventory so that when you came back through, you could have some discussions that were maybe on some level they were already preparing for that discussion. Now, it's interesting too. We're talking about two different things when we talk about removing obsolete inventory, right? One is removing it from the inventory master. Another one is actually physically removing it, from where it's being stored, right? And so it's obviously going to be easier once they say, yes, we don't use that, for you to remove the inventory from the master. But what do you do with it when it's on the shelf? Does it just go in the garbage? Are there services out there that can help you, get that product, like you said, Suzi, to some place where somebody could use it? So maybe you're part of a larger health system, but then if you're in a smaller facility, there may not be another home. There may not be anybody else that would be using it. How do you, Suzi, maybe start with you. How do you handle that?
Yeah. So, first, of course, we're going to check within, the healthcare system and ask, is anybody else using it? Look for purchase history on it. Secondary to that would be potentially working with the company to see if it has purchase value. And depending on when it's going to expire, it may just end up donated. It really depends. There's a lot of things that a company like Project Cure will actually take. But there's some things that just won't be useful to them. If it's something that attaches to a machine or it's part of another technology, sometimes we do just have to waste that. So we try our best to avoid that. I don't like to put anything in the landfill unnecessarily, but you still have to make a decision at some point to physically get it off the shelf. Especially if it is something that even the clinicians agree. We do have things that ever so often we'll go ahead and put a DNR. So we write DNR, do not reorder. So we blank the barcode so that, who's ever scanning knows that we're not going to use it. And then we just basically let them burn it down if they can. Because again, you can't really give staplers to Project Cure if you're not going to give them reloads, right? If you can give them something together, it makes sense. But sometimes it's just not going to be practical to do that.
I love the DNR. That's great. Do not reorder. Brian, any thoughts you want to add there? I've got a follow-up question, but I want to give you a chance to chime in here.
No, exactly what Suzi said. I think that's kind of where some of the challenges lie too, depending on how big of a system you have. And again, relying on that, a lot of what we have to do is just sending out an email, and we know how busy we are. It'd be nice if there was like an automated transfer where if you flag that as something that's non-moving and obsolete, it could automatically get transferred. I think that would be nice. Again, because relying on somebody on the other end to say, oh yeah, let me go talk to the OR. Can we use this? If you've got that usage data, it should be something that's automated. And then the other thing that we've done too is, clearly if it's something that's obsolete and if it's expired, we definitely write on that product. But we also have partnered with the nursing schools, and we will donate some of that expired supplies because they like having that for their, training. So that's another thing that we've done as well that it has worked pretty well too, just because they're interested in some of that. Again, some of it they won't take, but it's something they can use in their training. It's a good thing.
I was going to say, we're partnering with Jersey College right now. We're going to literally have a nursing school right next door. So that's a great thing to think about for the future as well.
Yeah, I've seen that with instrumentation and even surgical tech programs. Obviously there are just certain patterns that don't get used, but a lot of stainless steel instrumentation, even though a surgeon might notice the difference between a 6.5, Mets and a 4.5 Mets. If you're in surgical tech school, it doesn't really matter to you because you're not doing a real procedure, but to get some hands on the instruments, outside of the actual environment that you're training into. Same thing, for nursing as well. And then, I think that's a great way to put that to use. What are some common offenders? This was what was occurring to me, and Brian, we can flip this back over to you. Suzi mentioned sutures, but I know there's got to be some common offenders. Like if somebody is kind of new to, materials management in healthcare, or maybe they're just kind of starting to take more ownership over inventory. Maybe they're moving up the ladder, so to speak, and this is now they're kind of in charge of it. Like sometimes when you come in, if the inventory hasn't been well maintained, you got quite a project ahead of you. Maybe knowing what some of those common offenders are can really get them started off on the right track.
Yeah, anything in the surgical services arena, whether that's OR, CVOR, cath lab, that's your high ticket items. You've got a lot of physician preference items. And again, depending on the facility, a lot of times that area may not fall under the purview of supply chain, which it should. I mean, that's where, we talked about inventory turns. That's where you're going to get, the bang for your buck. It's unfortunate. I mean, we see these things, and to put it into perspective, you might work on a project to reduce the cost and you'll save, 10, 20,000. You're like, hey, that's a good little savings that we have. And then 1 or 2 items come down that are expired from the OR, and that completely negates everything that you've just worked through. I mean, I always think about things in perspective of FTEs. And so when you start looking at how much this obsolete inventory and expired product costs a facility, I mean, it's mind boggling. And so it's really important to get a control on that. Again, have visibility into it. I think that's one of the biggest hurdles that we all face. Again, especially if it's something that supply chain's not managing, because again, that most of the time they're doing their checks, but they're not pulling something until it's expired. So that's a conversation that we have a lot too. It's like, don't let me, same thing. If you're getting low on something, don't wait until you're out. Same thing on an expiring product. If you have something that's expiring, let us try to get it out of here. Even if we get a reduced fee for it, rather than let it expire. So again, being proactive on both sides of things. But again, up in the surgical areas, that's where, as far as cost, hands down, that there's opportunities up there.
Yeah. One of the things I'm excited about using the technology that I'm using is that I'm capturing literally the expiration date on every single product. So one of my plans is to also look at, have I ordered it in last year? Does it have a decent expiration date? In other words, it's got a 24 date on it. And then quite honestly, working with that vendor, because I think when you talk about things that are the high potential, it's when a vendor releases a new version, yet we still have the old version. And I often try to negotiate either some type of trade or, hey, if I'm not going to use this anymore because you're bringing me a new X, take some of my Y, right? And I think that that's an area of opportunity, is working with our vendors more. I mean, the reality is they got paid for the product. So being able to even use it to trade back is better than either having to, like we said, throw it away or donate it, because it does have some value. And most vendors have a better way of disposing of things and keeping it out of the landfill as well. So I think that there's some responsibility on the vendor side too. If they brought something in that didn't get used, help me to not have to just waste this product and waste these dollars.
All right, let's wrap this conversation up with some final thoughts. Brian, we'll go ahead and start with you. It sounds like you're going to add something to what Suzi just said.
I love what Suzi had mentioned. It is, we talk about this a lot. It's not an us versus them when it comes to supply chain or clinicians. It's we. And the same thing, we sit in kind of I used to have this Venn diagram on my board that I drew between finance, clinical, and vendors. And supply chain, we're trying to meet that happy middle there, right? Vendors are our partners. You can definitely tell the difference between somebody that's just trying to sell you something versus somebody that, like Suzi's saying, is helping clean up things on the back end, is a good partnership. So yeah, by all means, and same thing. I think at the root of it, we just need to get better data and transparency. Suzi, I need to talk to you at some point about the technology you're using and just kind of get your input, because I think anything that we can do to give us additional insight and data, it just puts us that farther ahead. And anything we can do to be more proactive. Again, that's from a supply chain side. If we've learned anything in the last few years, is even having a couple days, again, let us know, please work with us. Don't let us become reactive. Fridays come around and I'm like, it's 3:30. I haven't had a call. And then that last minute call comes in. Hey, we forgot to order this. Is it possible to get this for Saturday? You're like, oh my gosh. So again, it's just having that constant communication, and then having that discussion too. I like showing the cost to our clinical team so that they know. Some people are very aware of costs and others aren't. But at the end of the day, especially with the financial pressures, if you show somebody how much expired product comes down, they'll really start thinking about things differently and being a good steward on their end too. So it just comes down to building those relationships, whether it's with your clinical teams or with your vendors, and then relying on that communication back and forth in a proactive manner.
Yeah, I really love
Agree,
your
100%.
suggestion for the automation for managing the inventory. Like, hey, this hasn't expired, or maybe it doesn't expire, but it's not in use here. The data should be able to tell us exactly, maybe it's just a quick approval process. Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead. We didn't miss anything. Technology is how we build these efficiencies, but to your point too, so does, bigger picture thinking from the vendor partnerships. And, is there something more we can, if we're going to invest all this time into this project, can we get something more out of it than simply a conversion? And I think, as you speak to any vendors that are maybe watching this video, it's something to always be thinking about, is where do you bring that additional value? And what you just said is, how do you take a project and get more out of it? Because if you're already getting your hands dirty, you might as well do as much as possible. And to your point about engaging the clinicians, it's a partnership. So if you've got their attention, I really like how you set it up for success, Brian. You gave them some data, but even similarly, if you're going through a conversion and you're going to be partnering with the vendor, let's see what else we can do while we're already in there. So, Suzi, your final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, and I think too, it's having those communications as well with the surgeons. When I was at Tempe last week, we were counting, one of my general surgeons is like, uh-oh, am I in trouble because I was physically there? And I'm like, no, we're just counting inventory. You're good. You didn't do anything wrong this time. And it just kind of made me chuckle. But I mean, right. But I've engaged with him enough, but like, he's one who I'll say, I will give you what you want, the new product, but you have to burn down this previous inventory. So, find any win that you can. Don't let that stuff die on the shelf. And I will commit to him. I'm like, look, the new barcode, the minute we're starting to get low, we're going to order your new product, but I need you to burn down this other product. Or you talk to the rep and help me get the rep to trade. So, they've got those relationships too. So we just have to constantly do everything we can to try not to have obsolete on the shelf. And it takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of collaboration.
Well, another great conversation. And I think the people out there would probably watch this and think we do a lot of preparation. But the truth is we just come on and talk about the real world every time we record these, because it's so relevant. Yeah. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure that you are following Power Supply, subscribing to the podcast. Definitely connect with Brian and Suzi on LinkedIn, and follow Suzi on TikTok as well. The videos are really designed to talk about relevant frontline issues every single day. Suzi's got tons of examples and follow up on the TikTok additionally to what our discussions are on this video series. So thank you both again. And Suzi, good luck with your continued inventory now that you're moving on to the next facility.
Moving on. Thank you, guys. You take care, Brian. Take care, Justin.
Thank you both.